Hey crew, welcome to the 2023/24 NFL playoff pool. If you're wondering what exactly this is, if you have been in the leagues I was running this year, not the ones I was in, but the ones that I was running, I took a year off. And what does that mean when I take a year off? Apparently, I dabble in making random fantasy football wrap-up videos. As you'll see if you go onto the channel, there's one for pretty much every week of the fantasy season. Since I went that far, I thought, why not continue on with the playoffs? New audience, new people, but still just me rambling on. So if you find it entertaining, I know some of you digest your own playoff football. You watch every snap, you read every article, then maybe you don't necessarily need this except for the part that's exclusive to our particular pool. But I know some of you are on random time zones and watching every game is tough and following along can be a little bit more challenging. So hopefully I kind of cross a few stories that might be helpful. Either way, I enjoy it. I hope you do too. Before we get to our pool, I wanted just a few comments on the week that was. Now, a few days have passed. I didn't get around to this as fast as I thought I was going to, so we are dangerously close to the second round starting. But before we get there, a few moments and a few points of pause for last weekend. I think the first reaction has to be the games just weren't that good. You had massive weather infractions that really make you start to think, why do some stadiums just not have an indoor option? I mean, I get it. It used to work that way. But if you looked at the Bills Steelers, if I'm a Buffalo fan, they did fine in the end. They won by 2 touchdowns. But that's exactly the environment I don't want to play the Steelers in. If that was like a turf dome field, the Bills probably win by 30. They're a so much better team. But you give the Steelers the flukiness of playing in that kind of conditions, anything can happen. And if Josh Allen doesn't actually end up running a ton, he only threw for 200 yards, but did enough to get by. Realistically, that should have been a blowout, and it was a little bit closer than you think. It's just crazy to me what we do just because it's always been done that way. When having fans have to dig out their own seats in the snow sounds hardcore, but why? Why can't we just actually have a good time and play a good game? It's like we play an entire season of football to have the playoff game to be decided by a completely different style of sport. But aside from that, you had the Bucks that kind of limped by the Eagles, and the score, they ripped through them, but not exactly the most exciting game. Obviously, I think a lot of people love to watch the Packers and the Cowboys. Maybe not so much the Cowboys fans, but the fact that it was a huge upset. You could argue that game was pretty entertaining, more gunslinging, although the style itself, the Packers were up big and Dallas had to come back just to make it even somewhat close. So realistically, we were playing on one game, and that's Rams-Lions. That was obviously a great game. You got to feel for Stafford. I know the 1-for-1 still works, the quarterback swap from a couple years back, because he obviously won a Super Bowl. So it's not the loss that must have kicked him, but this has been fairly well reported, I think, at this point. But he's never heard Detroit that loud in his life. They never got behind the team as much as they did to kind of go against him. So I don't think he he obviously minds the loss, but if you're the Rams, this is still a successful year. That was supposed to be more of a rebranding year, and so many people thought they were going to tank at the start of the year, that the fact that they've developed so many young players is a great thing, but that at least gave us one game and something else to look forward to for the next time. So what I was kind of thinking about as we looked at this is some of the dynasties falling, the Cowboys going down, and then all the controversy whether or not the coach would get dropped. Obviously he hasn't. Then we look at, teams that right away, like, Atlanta's looking for a new head coach. Obviously the whole Patriots and Belichick situation. It did make me think a little bit about just kind of the concept of patience and the idea that, these managers and general managers really do have to kind of bide that. How much is too much time? When's the appropriate time to part ways? You can definitely tell there's a lot of reactionary GMs. Look at Baker Mayfield. He's been cut by so many teams, and yet he seems fairly serviceable. Apparently, he just felt like he never really had the confidence of the coaching staffs before, and obviously he's doing okay. He's gotten this far, but people quit on him on the regular, whereas some people seem to get infinite amount of chances. Even the Belichick situation, should he be cut a couple years ago? Was it really his fault that the Patriots were this bad? Could they have kept him on and he have a legacy and try and break the record under theirs? That's all up for them to decide. But one thing I thought was interesting in this whole mix, the Love situation. And I know people fell in way too much love with Jordan Love. Trust me, as someone who has him in a fantasy keeper league, I am definitely paying attention as to whether or not he's someone worthwhile. But people jumping ahead and saying this is 3 Hall of Famers in a row in quarterback. Now, granted, Favre, yes. Rodgers, likely, right? He seems like he would be a good ballot. You don't get judged for what you say or do off the field. So he is likely to get in there. I think after one good playoff game, it's a bit much of a rush. But one thing to factor in, and I get correlation is not causation. You can pick stats to try and prove anything. But if this is in fact 3 quarterbacks in a row, that is one of the only times I've seen that happen where 3 good quarterbacks could come on. And the 2 things the Packers have or do that others don't, number one is they seem to have that kind of patience to nurture a young quarterback. You look at the difference between some of the rookies this year, right? You've got CJ Stroud, who looks phenomenal. We'll talk about him when we get to looking ahead at the next week's matchups. But compare that to the actual number 1 pick. Is it really Bryce Young's fault? Now, he might be a bust. Fair enough. We don't really know yet after 1 year. But how many quarterbacks in the league could have won with that Carolina roster? Any? So the Packers have shown the ability to show that kind of patience, and that could be because they have one thing going for them that everyone else in the league doesn't. They don't have an owner. So they don't have someone to be overly reactionary. I mean, they have a board and a group, but they don't have one person. Because if you listen to this, I mean, the more you get into it, and I think we all know this, but there's a league that we don't see, the owners and the big Wang competition that goes on. I'm shocked if Jerry Jones didn't actually put some feelers out to get Belichick, not because he necessarily thought it was a good idea, but just to screw over Kraft, because apparently they hate each other. Because, billionaires have to billionaire against each other, and they have to size everything up. So there's always the game behind the game that we don't really get to see, and at least the Packers don't get involved in that. I don't know if that's going to actually help them produce in the long run, but I'm sure in this particular case, it can't hurt. Anywho, enough of my rambling. Let's get on to our league and some of the stats that I looked up before we get on to our actual results. This part might be interesting to just me, maybe not. So I thought I'd share it. I want to kind of keep track of some of the stats as they go along. So just kind of position by position here, we will get to a little bit more of our actual reactions or our results, but I want to kind of do a hybrid here quick. For our quarterbacks, our top scoring quarterback last week was Allen. Even amongst players that didn't get picked, his 39 points was well over Dax's 34. They were 2 commonly picked players, however, with Dax having 9. He was actually our leading candidate for a quarterback who got knocked out. 9 of you have to look for a new quarterback. 7 people took Allen, so we see kind of they were 2 of the most popular picks next to Lamar, who didn't actually play. Weirdly enough, though, 3rd scoring quarterback was Baker Mayfield, 32 points. No one took him. And then tied with 4th, 2 people no one took. Again, the aforementioned CJ Stroud and Jordan Love round out our top 5. They both had 28 points apiece. At the running back, the number 1 running back and number 2, tied for 2 running back, were not taken. Aaron Jones went off for 30 points. No one saw that one coming, apparently. And Hunt for the Browns. Not the running back that at least some people thought were going to go off, tied for Pacheco's 14. So Pacheco was the second highest, or tied for the second highest. Pollard was our highest scoring running back that Arrivederci is gone. 7 people felt the blow of that one, and he'll be out of here. He had 13 points. And then rounding out tied for our top 5 are actually both Detroit running backs. If you actually had them in fantasy, this is quite normal that they both just seem to score somehow. Both Gibbs and Monty had 12 apiece, and people did have both. I mean, one person had Monty. Gibbs had 6 owners take a shot on him. Now, they were actually also tied with Singletary, who no one has taken, but is still technically fishing in there. In terms of our wide receiver position, our number 1 wide receiver / tight end, Jake Ferguson, start taking yourself. We had this conversation. Now, granted, Jake, you did win the league that I ran that you were in, so I guess you didn't need to spike the ball. But man, this is part of the reason why I got out of hockey playoff or hockey fantasy, because taking Mike Fisher did not get me enough points, but I would want to take him every single time. And unless you got extra points for a player being married to an American Idol alumna, unfortunately, he wasn't really panning out for me. But Jake Ferguson would pan out for you. He got 27 points. He was our leading receiver. Now, he would have also been knocked out, so I wouldn't take him now. Number 2, also knocked out, Puka Nacua, and a few people did take a shot at him, so that was pretty decent. Our top receiver that's still in the game was Dobbs, but no one took him. He had 21 points. I do have a story about Ricci Rice from Kansas City. I had him in on the Dogs bracket. Yes, I take a Dogs bracket. It's my gut reaction. Leave me alone. I do it in March Madness as well. He had 19. I legitimately had Rice instead of Kelsey until 15 minutes before kickoff, and I changed it, and now I'm already kicking myself. And then rounding out our top 5, Nico Collins. So if you look, almost no one took the receivers in the top 5. A lot of the wide receivers that were taken, all but one person took CeeDee Lamb. So obviously that's why every single player or every single team is at least missing a player. He did have 11, so that's respectful, but he was just inside our top 10. So we'll see for next week. I'll keep track of these just to see how the stats kind of roll on. I think the only other thing of value, and I'll get to this in a little bit more when I look at our results in a second, if you notice the number next to, that'll be gone for next week. I put how many players people had that were out, okay? Because if you took, a lot of people took a lot of 49ers and a lot of Ravens, obviously, because I think people are assuming they make a run. Kent Rushke, unfortunately, half of his team was out, so he only had 6 players actually playing, so his 81 points don't look great. But I did a point per player average to try and see how we sorted out. So take someone like Kent, 15th in our poll, or tied for 14th currently, but he did score 13.5 per player, which was actually quite decent. So now the fact that he has those players coming back, he could be quite dangerous. If we're looking at our top, though, we did have a few players kind of stand out. We had a top 3, top 4 here. So even look at our number 1 overall, Jim Slade. He actually had a decent point per player average with 14.4. Slightly better than him was Ben Warner, had 102 points, but he had a 14.57. Now he did have 5 players that will be joining the fray this week, so he should have a much better result in general. Moving up though, and second best PPP, the aforementioned Jake Ferguson, who is tied for second with 139 points. He had a 15.44. But our number 1, he had 4 players who are jumping into the roster this week. Tied with Jake is actually Mike Pollock, also our second, tied for second overall with 139. He had 17.38 points per player, which was by far almost 2 full points better than everybody else. So if he keeps that up, he should shoot ahead here now that he has a full roster. If you don't know Mike, he is a bit of a fantasy connoisseur, let's say. So trust me, I bet you he's crunching the math himself. But obviously this will always come down to how many players do you have left? Is it better to score points when you can, or is it better to try and keep some people for later rounds? We'll leave that for the next couple weeks to sort out. But now let's go to our actual results and the things that are going to decide our pool. These are the tabs that everyone can see just quickly in case on my screen. So you see everyone's name here. I won't change the order here. It's alphabetical by last name. But as you can see, I'm going to constantly be changing this order here. So congrats. We know top 3 does end up getting paid out. So right now that's Jim, and then Jake and Mike, you're tied. Now, if it looks like a tie is about to happen, what I've done in the past, we put the money together and then you split it 50-50. So you don't quite make as much as the second, but you'd make more than the third. If we want to try and come up with an outrageous tiebreaker, we can do that. But obviously, the odds of that happening at the very end are minimal, but we should know with players if it's even a possibility. People like Will and myself, my dad, we're all on the outskirts looking in. Now, you might wonder what the numbers here. So obviously, this is the number of people that we lost. So congrats to my dogs and my dad. They lost the least amount, only 2 each. Although Jake losing 3 and being that high up, that actually could bear in. Unluckily for my kind of bracket I named after me, and for Will Vrootenhill 2, Electric Boogaloo, or whatever he called it, bonus points for anyone who knows that movie reference I just made, we lost more than half of our team. So the odds of us using a sub, well, I can't speak for Will. The odds of me using my sub this week is very high because you want to make sure you get as many in. Now, you might be wondering what this number here is. I'm not going to keep this after this week. I wanted to write it down because I was curious, especially in my points per player calculation I was looking into, how many we took that were number 1 seed base. So how many 49ers and Ravens were on each team. So we look here, Jim obviously did great, but he had 10 of his 12 playing, whereas someone like Senor Rushke down here had half his team sitting on the bench waiting for this week, which will be nice because he'll actually have more players kind of come in than he lost. And that's the kind of math we want to make sure that we're doing. Now, in terms of the sub rule, I just want to make sure it's clear. If you have any questions, you can certainly ask. Some of you have already done the sub. Some have not. Remember, you don't have to do it. You get 1 for the entire playoffs, so use it wisely. But if you're wondering, like let's say, for instance, I just told you that I would be using my sub. But if you look at my team, I haven't changed anything quite yet. Okay, and the reason being is a bunch of you have already sent me your subs. I will send a note just to say, yes, I got it. If I forgot to do that, I will do that right now so you're not panicking. But at kickoff, so it's 4:30, I believe, Eastern Standard Time, 10:30 currently my time in Switzerland. As soon as kickoff happens to start the second round of the playoffs, I will put in everyone's sub. I just don't want it to be a thing where some people know, some people don't. We can vote on that later at some point in time if we carry this on for future years. I just figured that was the best way to do it. That way there's no real competitive advantage. Now, if you're worried about me not knowing and you don't want me to know until the last minute, feel free to send it 5 minutes before kickoff, or we can arrange something where you send it to a third party if you think I'm doing anything. Let's be honest here, folks. I'm not playing with, there'd be better ways of trying to work people out of money than running a pool like this. It's not worth its time. So I'm certainly not looking for any competitive advantage here. Hopefully that kind of helps. And like I said, I'll keep updating the order here. I think a few things other than the stats I've already kind of thrown out that might be of interest to us. Do pay attention again to lost players. I think I mentioned it before, but we do have a few players who are on the way out. Now, in terms of just players that are commonly taken. So only one team, the aforementioned Will Rugdenhill 2, is the only team that didn't take the CMC Music Factory and McCaffrey or CD Lamb. Everyone else took both of those people. So if they do anything, well, we know what CD did. If McCaffrey does anything, you're getting the points for it. If he bombs, then Will Rugdenhill 2 definitely benefits. In terms of other commonly taken people, I think Kyron Williams is probably the other most commonly picked running back who went out. I don't think I mentioned him, but actually 9 people took him, so 9 people are hurting there. But in terms of running backs who are left, it looks like Cook with 9 people is the most common. Pacheco, 7 of us went down that road. Gibbs, 6 of us went down that road, and 5 people are riding Gus the Bus from the Ravens this week. In terms of receivers, other than CeeDee Lamb, which was by far the most, surprisingly, number 2 receiver, maybe not surprisingly, Deebo Samuel. I mean, he does make big plays. He is their guy that they like to use in multiple facets. So he's pretty electric when he's out there. I believe 11, unless I'm squinting and seeing that wrong, of the 15 took him. 8 people took Diggs, so they obviously are not worried about Buffalo, and they think they're going to get by just fine. Ayuk, 5 people. Cooper, unfortunately, that's 6. Kelsey, also 6, but he's still playing, so that's not so bad. St. Brown, 7. Amon-Ra, fantastic. I had him in a bunch of leagues. Love that guy. Zay Flowers, surprisingly, I think people were looking for Ravens wide receivers. 5 people ended up taking him. Now, the only other kind of hitch there is 3 people took Isaiah Likely, and it looks like Andrews is practicing. Now, how much he's going to play, I don't know. I'll try and keep us up to date with some random stats, because you can always read. If you want to know who has what, again, go check out their rosters, and hopefully this kind of helps you make decisions in the future. Now we know where we've been. Last little look to finish off here in terms of where we're going. Should be pretty excited. Like I mentioned with the sub rule, as soon as the kickoff happens. Now, once again, that is apparently they just like the Texans to kick off the playoffs. Each round now, they're 2 for 2. So they are opening game at the Ravens. This whole week in general, one of the big themes is a lot of the higher or the lower seeds have all of the pressure. And this is a perfect example of that. CJ Stroud is already playing with house money. Houston was supposed to be kind of reforming this year. They're just getting their bearings. Rookie quarterback. He goes in and not only makes a joke out of that trade, because obviously we know the history between them and Watson and who the Texans have taken with their draft picks versus what the Browns have done, and they weren't even starting that quarterback that they paid so much for. If CJ comes out, he's already in the winner's circle. If he can come out and do it again to Baltimore, and I know it's not as likely, Baltimore has looked fantastic. When healthy, they have crushed people. Go back and look at some of their big wins, the 49ers and some of the ones in the last few weeks that they're rolling on. They weren't even close. Now, their defense is the DPOA, the kind of highest rated, but Cleveland was up there in the top 3, and the Texans made them look like a joke. Now, I don't expect Lamar Jackson to do 2 back-to-back pick sixes like Joey Flacco did, but if the Texans can make this close, you never know. But coming with Baltimore, a lot of us do have Lamar as a quarterback, at least 7, I believe, people already. That doesn't include people who might be taking him on as a sub for next week. So I think a lot of people are resting assured that the Ravens should come out and take care of business. But again, if the Texans don't do it, no skin off their nose. If they do, a star is truly born in CJ Stroud. Echo the exact same thing for the afternoon game, or the morning game for some of us on the Saturday. That's Green Bay at San Francisco. Same but different. When healthy, San Francisco has by far been the best team in the NFC. I can't see the Packers having anyone who can stop anybody on San Francisco, but if things start going, or if it's a shootout, or if things kind of go their way, we'll see how big Love's heart actually is. Because again, If the Packers lose, it's not a big deal. They just squeaked into the playoffs. They weren't even supposed to make it, so they're already playing with house money. Coming into the Sunday, we do have what could be maybe a close matchup. We'll see. The Lions, in theory, should be able to take it to Tampa Bay, because Tampa Bay, if you've had to watch them for the last couple weeks, last week they looked fine, but Philly just looked sick and they kind of put them down. The last few weeks of the regular season, I mean, the Bucs just squeaked by Carolina. Had some really tough matchups with some divisional rivals, and they didn't look amazing, but Baker's been playing well. But if the Lions can roll like they did against the Rams, they could prove that realistically those might have been two of the best teams that just happened to play each other early. And if Detroit didn't treat last week like a Super Bowl in their big final, maybe the fans will come out again, and that might be tough. But I think the game of the week, the one that most people are looking forward to the most, Chiefs at Bills. Now, weirdly enough, I had to look this up. You can fact check me, and if I'm wrong, leave it in the comments. But I believe this is Mahomes' first ever road playoff game that's not a Super Bowl at a neutral site. So obviously this is already a down year for the Chiefs. And you would think, returning Super Bowl champions, all the pressure's on them. I would argue the opposite. Everyone's already giving Mahomes a free pass. We know that he has wide receivers that just can't catch. Kelsey's getting banged up and is a little bit older. I don't believe at all the bit, and I left this on a video for my leagues. I did a little bit of a wrap-up video. Feel free to watch that one if you want. I did an Ocean's 11 theme because it entertained me. I do not blame anyone in the stands, nor would I ever for what someone does on the field. But Kelsey is a little bit older. It's harder for him to get open. It's harder for him to get separation. So Mahomes has all the excuses in the world if he doesn't do this. If you're Buffalo, this is legitimately the biggest game that I can remember them ever playing, except for obviously their early 90s, late 80s-ish Super Bowl run or Super Bowls run that didn't end up working out in their favor. If they lose again, you start adding up, the 13-second game, the fact that they just can't seem to get by the Chiefs, the fact that they just kind of had this controversial season where realistically, if Kadarius Toney isn't offside, this game is played in Kansas City. I can't imagine more pressure being on one team, where if the Chiefs go ahead to the next round, it's great for them. If they don't, like I said, they have excuses. If the Bills don't win, I don't want to build this up to be too much, but it could be one of those games that echo on and actually create the necessity for some of those rash moves in the offseason. So either way, let's hope that we get a couple good games out of this. But for me, it's the playoffs. I'm excited. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, because it's coming again next week, so you can watch it or pretend that you watched it. But either way, folks, best of luck in week 2, and I'll see you next week.